Now we'll get into some tips and tricks, little things to make sure your projects go smoothly. One of the big things with plate that differs from using a tape field, scanning it in, and then aligning geometry to that scanned and gridded traditional Origin workflow is now you just drop plate down, index against a physical index detail, and then begin cutting. Now that's great. Just make sure if you're going to revisit a dimension, say you're working on a glue gap or a friction fit, don't move plate in between. So do your test fit and confirm that you've got exactly what you're after. Then you're free to move plate, get on to the next one. Make a note of your settings and you'll be producing multiples of the same thing in rapid succession. So because Origin is focusing on getting everything that's on the same plane as our tape perfectly aligned and accurate, like that's the focus of when we stitch together all our images when we're scanning. Now, what that means is the information underneath plate on the actual work surface is going to be slightly less accurate. So use your gridding and your indexing elements for your precise alignment to pencil marks. Don't be relying on what you see on screen because they can get a little smudged and blurry now that we're 1/4 inch up above that surface. Be sure to stow all your indexing elements, so the reticle and the fence. Get that out of the way before you start cutting. Just make that a habit and you'll never have any problems cutting into those. Now you may find situations like you want to align to something and this edge is kind of unstable. You want to avoid being somewhere where Origin is going to roll over that position, but you can actually thread these little feet in. They're just 5mm screws. You don't want to do it so they come up too high. That can just provide a little bit of added security so that things don't move underneath you as you're cutting. So there is one situation that can be a problem for the scanning or add to scan phase of plate. So long as you're not adding any more, doing any more scanning, tape in the periphery won't have any impact on your plate experience. But if there's tape at a lower height or a higher height visible when you're scanning in your plate initially, you will produce a low quality and inaccurate scan, and all of your plate operations from that point on will be jittery and poor quality. Make sure no markers are visible when you scan in your plate or perform an add to scan on plate and you will get excellent outcomes. So when touching off, the most common thing to do is to touch off onto the actual surface you are cutting. That way when you enter a value of 0, you're cutting to 0. So if you're engraving, it'll be 0.02 or something like that, versus touching off on the top of plate itself or Origin's regular touch off approaches, in which case you'll have to add this distance here, 6.5mm to each cut, and it takes a lot of keeping track of that. So we touch off on the surface itself, and what that means is we bring the pressure sensitive bar so that it rests on this flat surface, and then just look in here and make sure that your cutter is going to collide with the wood. So if I hit Z touch here, it's going to touch off a little lower than it ordinarily would, but that gets you now 0 is surface of the wood 0. If there's ever a bow or a buckle in your plate, chances are you have over tensioned the clamps or something. If I ever fail to get a touch off here, like if it's repeatedly saying touch off failed to complete, I can come over here and get my pressure sensitive area on this flat area, and that will succeed. So that's just an option. Same applies to the opposite side. So long as I'm a flat surface, Origin can see a tape field and the pressure sensitive area is supported, we're good. So with the clamps, first we want to make sure they're indexed all the way towards the bottom. We don't want them to be partially engaged here. You'll see there's very little material keeping this clamp attached. So push it all the way to the back and then either clamp at 90 degrees this way or 90 degrees this way for the best results. Do not over clamp. We want for there to be consistent clamping pressure, we want it to be light, and we want the friction mat to do most of the work. So, in this state, this is going nowhere, and I only use 2 fingers to tighten it. So keep that in mind, and that way, if I was to clamp again in another location, I'm not crushing that mat to a different depth, in which case I'll get different cut outcomes. So yeah, finger tight, consistent clamping, always 90 degrees, either this way, same with these guys. And always make sure you're properly engaged at the back of your little keyhole slot. So situations like this, sometimes you want to align something in the middle of an area and you've just got a mark for where the center is. Maybe the orientation isn't too important, maybe it's circular, maybe it's something that doesn't matter how it's oriented, you just want to find that center point. So the reticle's great for that, in that we can just bring it down and confidently know we've found the center of that X. You can also, by eye, obviously, line up to the physical line itself, push the reticle out of the way, then your logo or whatever it is you're placing is going to be perfectly aligned to that center point. But yeah, that's the reticle's primarily for finding that center using nothing but optical registration. For operations like corner rounding, you're probably going to end up using one of our large cutters. So this is 35mm cutting flutes. I believe it's 42mm long cutting depth maximum it can go to. So what that means is you use the full Z travel of Origin, and as a result it ends up hovering just above the surface of plate. So just whenever you install this guy, be careful and confirm that as you move it to the side, it actually clears this surface and isn't dragging on the surface. Because then every time you push Origin to the side, it'll be spinning and it'll cut up your tape field. So just make sure it's 0.5 millimeter above that surface whenever you install it in your collet and tension the spindle lock.